So just to bring the session to life, GTA's role today is to ensure the efficient facilitation of commercial activities across the supply chain, and to enable to do this, GTA, in order to fulfill its charter, relies on various technical committees. One of those committees is the Information Technology Advisory Committee, which I chair, and is made up from 10 members who are selected on merit by the board of GTA. The ITAC committee is developing an industry technology roadmap to provide a reference for the industry and aims to assist with coordinating efforts. We're joined by Emma Weston, who's a member of ITAC and has kindly offered to talk to the industry technology roadmap this afternoon. We're also joined again by David Ironside from the department, who's with us to answer some questions following Emma's presentation. And if I may, before I hand over to Emma, a brief bio on Emma. So Emma is CEO and co-founder of AgriDigital, one of Australia's leading emerging agtech and fintech companies. Emma's had a diverse career as a lawyer and an agribusiness executive. She's a mentor to several startups and founders in Australia and overseas, and was named one of Australia's top 25 fintech influencers in 2017. She was awarded Female Fintech Leader of the Year and Emerging Fintech Leader of the Year for 2017 by Fintech Australia, as well as Female Fintech Leader of the Year at the 2017 Australia Fintech Awards. Emma was announced as a winner of the Eastern Region Disruptor category in the EY Entrepreneur of the Year 2019 Awards. And with that, I'll hand over to Emma.
Thanks very much, Dan. I must get a shorter bio. That was quite a long read, wasn't it? Sorry about that. I'm taking a bit of a trip into the industry technology roadmap that we have been discussing and are starting to develop as part of the IT Advisory Committee at the GTA. So today, all I'm going to do, and Pat, you really alluded to this earlier, it's about setting out concepts that are aligned to the strategy of the industry, but also of the GTA, and that we want members and attendees to take away with them today rather than getting into too much detail. So we really want to set out the context for why a technology roadmap. We haven't had one before, at least at the GTA, from an industry perspective. How are we going to go about developing one? What might it look like? And how might we be using it? And then we'll have some time for questions as well. So I will try and get through this as quickly as possible, and everyone will have access to the slide set if they wish to later on. So really we have, and a lot of today has been talking about the landscape that is changing very rapidly, not just from a technology perspective, but that is the presentation content today, focusing in on the fact that there is broad and rapid change across standards. We've heard a lot about standards today, across regulation, and that's obviously creating a momentum for us in the industry to look at our technology backbone, and also the technology applications that we're using as we go to access new markets as well as maintain market access. From a technology standpoint, it is about a multiplicity of technologies. There's no one technology or set of technologies that is more important really than the other, but we're talking about adoption in particular across cloud, digital, automation, IoT, blockchain, AI, and more. And we're also talking about the way that data is being shared across the industry by multiple participants and the role that technology plays in assisting with that. So some of the trends are up on the screen. These probably won't be new to any or many of you. A couple that I might point out, though, is that they are very much global. There is a lot happening all around the world. And although Africa looks a little blank there is a lot happening in Africa as well, particularly when we're looking at sustainable sourcing practices. The sustainable sourcing is finding its translation into sustainable development goals that have been set by the UN, but they're increasingly being adopted by particularly large multinationals in our space, such as Louis Dreyfus and Cargill, just to name two. You can see there Louis Dreyfus's Sustainable Soy Program and Cargill's alignment with the SDGs, where they do annual reporting now against the Sustainable Development Goals. In America, we have heard, and ITAC was privileged to hear from the US FDA around the changes to the food traceability list. Grains are currently exempt from that list, but they will be included, I'm sure, at some point in the future. And so starting to prepare around key data elements and the critical tracking events will ensure that markets are open to us. And although we're not necessarily importing key grains or large grains in volume into the US, these are the sorts of trends that are happening that we need to be aware of. Even in Australia, there is the National Blockchain Roadmap that has been launched by government and that has a supply chain working group, and recently 2 grants were announced for work that has been done in the area. So there's definitely a lot that is happening in the space. So the technology roadmap for the industry is driven by GTA's strategic direction statement, which is available on the website for everyone to have a look at, and is designed to be aligned to global and national growth and leadership priorities. It really is our goal to develop a roadmap that is a reference point for government, industry and members, so that individually members can understand where technology is heading in the industry, and they can take advantage of that, importantly, to grow and sustain their businesses and the industry overall. So it will be a guidance document that describes the industry challenges and the potential innovations that could assist us to meet those challenges. We've heard about a few of those today. It will be horizon-based, not time-based. So we're not talking about when something has to be done or when we think a particular innovation or technology will drop. None of us are smart enough and have a sharp enough or clean enough crystal ball to be able to offer that type of prophesizing. But it will be sort of near or now, near and in the future type horizons that we'll be talking to in the roadmap. And it'll be about innovations that are going to drive our participation, our growth and our competitive positioning as individual members of GTA, but also as an industry. Importantly, the technology that we'll be looking to include in the roadmap could be quite simple. It could be just around the transfer of or the digitization of particular state standards or location differentials or whatever it may be. It could be quite complex, and it could indeed be transformational, such as digital currencies, just to name one. But the common denominator of what will make it to the roadmap will be the types of innovations or technologies that are really engineered to help us capture innovation dividends for the industry. It, of course, needs to be a living document that will be reviewed annually by the GTA board to ensure that it's relevant. We can't just set this and forget it. That's not the way it's going to work. And the ITAC, as I understand it, will have carriage of the document and also have carriage of ensuring that we bring in members and have member consultation, because this is a document for members by members. That's what the IT Advisory Committee is. It's made up of members of the GTA. So finally, in terms of what that might look like in terms of the next steps, we will be engaging with members. So that's the next part of what we wanted to talk about with everyone today is coming up over the next, say, 4 to 6 weeks. There'll be some type of member consultation. We're obviously still somewhat limited in how we can do that due to COVID restrictions, but perhaps smaller group meetings or video calls to gather ideas, discuss challenges, and understand the current technology uptake and usage across the members. The idea would then be to develop a draft roadmap that could be shared with everyone, and this will be for broader consultation and feedback, eventually to external stakeholders such as government as well. Importantly, to continue ensuring that we've got that alignment that we've been really trying hard to build as an organisation with government, and to make sure that the roadmap is actually useful. There's no point developing this if it doesn't actually help, obviously get us all forward. Now, I've grayed out here on this presentation from June, July onwards, and that's just because we'll obviously learn from those first couple of steps how we want to then proceed to finalise the roadmap. But the idea would be that we would be able to launch it this year. This is not a multi-year development process. It's something that's short and sharp, and that we develop a useful roadmap that can be shared internally, but also with external stakeholders as soon as possible, and then will be reviewed by government. So that's all we really wanted to present today. Thanks very much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions, and we will be in contact. This is something that you'll hear more about over time.
Thanks, Emma. That was great. It was a very good overview of what we want to achieve. I'm just waiting for David to come on as well. So I think it's quite important that, I know you mentioned it, but it's very important from an industry and a government perspective that we set goals and targets, and that we do it together, so that we actually align the align the strategies of industry and governments, because that way it certainly will produce the best benefit, the most benefit.
Absolutely. So I think that effort's already underway, as you've mentioned before, Tim. So it's really about how do we, and in some ways for everybody to understand that this roadmap will be a one-pager depiction. If I didn't make that clear earlier, it's not a long document. It's really supposed to be a short, sharp snapshot that in one page shows us where technology and innovation can take us as an industry and what we may be able to do individually to prepare for that.
Just a question for you, perhaps. I'm just wondering where the government is in ensuring it can participate in these global move to uptake technology and such things as EDOPS. I know you mentioned a bit earlier on, but perhaps if you could just sort of provide a view as to how capable the government is in the short term and the medium term to move forward with technology.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks, Emma. That was a really interesting presentation, I thought. Look, the government has really, I guess, invested pretty significantly in the department's ability to lift up its capability in terms of IT, which I think somebody told me some years ago that the department had, on average, for the decade preceding that time, invested about 4% of its turnover in IT, and by comparison to other government departments, that's really, really low. So to give you an idea, the Bureau of Meteorology in the same period invested about 12%, and they have a pretty significant IT presence, but not huge. And departments like Centrelink were investing up to 30% of their turnover in IT development. So for the Department of Agriculture to have been for a decade or more investing about 4%, we've got a lot of catching up to do. We are a long way behind. But with the congestion busting initiative that the government announced at the budget last year, there is a really significant body of funding there that can be used. Most of it will be dedicated to just upgrading the export IT systems to make them more usable and better able to integrate with industry systems. So it's not like we don't integrate it all with industry systems at the moment. There is a bit of that. So we use third-party systems for the submission of things like requests for permits or RFPs that some of you would be familiar with. We use PEMS to collect information that's collected by authorised officers in terms of the outcomes of their inspections and things like that. But there is certainly lots and lots of scope for us to better integrate that data that comes in from a variety of sources relating to each individual export consignment, and then to automate away a lot of the manual processing that currently happens. So if any of you have ever had I'd call it an opportunity, but that's probably a very positive word for it, but ever had the experience of watching some of our documentation staff working through a grain export request for permit and the things that they have to do to make sure that the information on the certificate matches the information that's submitted by both the exporter or the EDI user on one hand, and the authorised officer on the other. It's really quite painful. In fact, I was at one point 2 years ago, I was taking a group around from the Department of Treasury and also Prime Minister and Cabinet, and a lot of the people in the tour were recent graduates who joined finance or PM&C, and we walked out of a kind of a demo of how we manage our certification process in Melbourne, and one of the young ladies made me feel very, very old by saying to me as we got back in the bus, Mr. Ironside, when we were in that meeting, somebody talked about a thing called carbon paper. Can you explain what that is, please? I have to say, it's a very ancient way of making a duplicate of a document, and you could just see the incomprehension that in this day and age, someone was using carbon paper to make copies of documents, but that's how far behind this department is in some quarters for some of the things we do. So lots of scope for just lifting up our basic IT capacity. But as part of that, I think we need to be really, really conscious that industry is evolving and improving its IT systems all the time, and we need to be looking for ways to better integrate our system so that that exchange of information that happens every day in huge volumes is done more effectively, and that we automate as far as possible the processing of that information to turn it into the thing that the client wants, which is export certification.
I've got a question, Tim, if I may. It's actually for both Emma and for David, and it's actually related to what David was just talking about. So a question around coordination and monitoring. How does the industry and the government currently keep aligned with the pace and the number of different bodies working within this space? David, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'd have to say it's a pretty ad hoc process, to be honest, at the moment. So the department has a digital services area that has traditionally managed, the development of our IT, and that has always included a degree of interaction with industry, because if we're getting information from industry, then we have to be cognizant of the way that industry can prepare that data and submit it. But I'd say it hasn't been a particularly coordinated approach that we've taken in the past. You'd find even within the department, even within the export space, a lot of the approach has been industry by industry. So we might talk to the grain industry about what works for grain industry, and separately and at another time and in a whole other way, the department might engage with, say, dairy exporters or meat exporters, and find that there were similarities that we probably could have recognised quite profitably earlier on, but also differences that we really need to take on board. But because it's just all happened in a kind of ad hoc and as required way, we've missed opportunities to do that. So I think there's a whole raft of reasons, that not the least of which is that kind of very low level of investment in IT for a decade or more that's got us into the position we are now. But as of last year, and with the money that funding we've now got for the digital strategies that the department is investing in specifically for exports, I think we've got an opportunity that's realistically probably a once in a decade opportunity to try and lift our game and integrate better with industry as we go forward.
I guess I'd have to echo that and say that it's not really a judgment of fortunately, unfortunately, the situation is the situation, and we are where we are. But I also sit on the Commonwealth government entity of the Digital Skills Organisation, which is a DESI or Department of Employment funded initiative, and one of the frustrations there is that digital is a pan industry trend and technology that needs to be looked at really seriously by every aspect of government and industry. So it's actually quite hard to coordinate some of these efforts, to be fair. At the same time, there are things that we can do to make it a lot easier. So having a roadmap, a single point of reference that the grains industry can get behind and can share with multiple government departments in a very easy format that is a very easy read, that in fact perhaps can be digitally engaged with itself, is part of the solution to trying to bring together government and industry in a way that's proactive, so that because we all often feel, I think, like we're chasing our own tails or we're falling behind. So, I think this is an initiative where we can try and get ahead. Knowledge sharing is key to this, but also being able to, I guess, aggregate information from members and be able to pass that through to government in a meaningful way that translates through to initiatives that are happening across government, both federal and state. So look, I know I'm biased, on the ITAC committee, and where we're sponsoring this initiative, but we do think that is one of the ways, and only one, but one of the ways in which we can help in that regard, Dan.
Okay, and if I could just follow up with two questions, I guess, which could be considered examples. If we were to take two things such as digital currency and maybe solving something like string sale complexity, how would those two questions feature on the industry technology roadmap? And maybe you want to relate them to the Horizon sort of arrangement.
Yeah. So I think if we see digital currencies, for example, as a particular trend that as an industry we want to play towards, and it may be to begin with, we just want to be informed about that, then we may want to be able to have a way of engaging with digital currencies as they're being developed around the world. And then we may want to, I'm just putting it out there, we may want to issue our own trade coin, for example, that was, going to be used some way down the track. So there's a number of different ways that could happen, and that was not a hit prediction by, any stretch of the imagination. But the reality is, I didn't put it on the global context slide, but there are several central banks and governments around the world, including in our region, who are looking at digital currencies. Australia is in that group, but is aiming to be a fast follower. I must say that, in the tech industry, we wouldn't classify the Australian government as a fast follower when it comes to digital currency, but that is the kind of the official position. The reality is that China and Singapore are incredibly more advanced. And, what we would want to do as GTA to be able to not just rely necessarily on, what government is doing in Australia, but to be able to bring, the international knowledge and what's happening in the international community to our members, so that in the very beginning, Dan, they could be aware of what was going on, and then to be able to link that perhaps to particular technologies or trends that we're seeing in our industry. And I would just choose Covantus, the multinational consortium, blockchain consortium on post-trade settlement and export docs, as one. Now, they have built that trading platform on Ethereum, which is a blockchain protocol that could avail itself of multiple currencies, digital currencies in the future. And that future may only be, 18 months to 2 years away. And we want to make sure that the industry is prepared for that. So, that's kind of one extreme. Then we have, the strings that you were talking to earlier, which is, perhaps something that's a little bit more peculiar to our industry, that we would want to have a deeper consultation with members around how we would want to be able to solve for that technologically. And so that may hit the technology roadmap in a different way, which is more bespoke to what we want to do in Australia. And we may be looking at a set of technologies or even providers that could assist us in solving that particular problem. The idea of the roadmap would be that it's a galvanizing document for having that discussion in a way that is completely aligned to pre-existing strategy at GTA and government level.
That's a very good answer, Emma. An exceptionally good answer. I've just had a question come up on the chat line, so I'll just read that out. I think it's probably a question for yourself, Emma, and maybe even Dan might want to comment as well. Is the framework intended to be agreements on how the data is meant to be shared collectively, or more targeted as the agreed rules on how the framework will operate to avoid unnecessary duplication and interpretations?
Yep. Do you want me to have a go at that?
Yes, if you can.
Yep. Okay, great. So I think it's probably tending more towards the latter, but the early period of consultation and what we would, in technology terms, call a discovery process that we will undertake with members will help the ITAC understand where we should be directing the roadmap to solve for the emerging data space. And is the concern and the problem really around standardization, or is it around inability to agree on a permissioning system around sharing data? So we'll kind of delve into that over the next 6 to 8 weeks. I think a lot will come out, and that's why we've actually pulled out data as a particular segment. We think a lot is going to come out on data. And we will also have to do some cross-industry collaboration to understand, what downstream requirements there are, in the food part of the chain that we need to be playing towards, not just our upstream requirements. So, look, I think Malcolm might have popped that in the chat, but there's probably others asking something similar. My view is it's probably going to tend to be a more generic leadership tool, the technology framework and the technology roadmap, rather than setting a requirement for the industry. It's there as a guide and as some guardrails that we can play to as an industry, but not to tell any of us what to do or how to run our businesses, to be frank.
I think that's very important. That roadmaps are for guidance, but it's a bit of a segue, I guess, into just security of data. Obviously, we've heard today about new technology around grain assessment and storage standards, and obviously there'll be information captured there as well, which will potentially end up in a digital format. And we've certainly got an objective at some stage to be able to have digital consignment so that we can share information a little bit more seamlessly through the supply chain.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, Tim, that we're really concerned about as an industry, or we should be concerned about if we're not, is creating honeypots. These are stores of data in a centralized location that become a honeypot for hackers. And, there are disadvantages to being excessively fragmented as we are as an industry. But one of the advantages is it's hard to access and collate global or industry-wide data. So, security, and particularly cyber security, is going to be a big part of what we will be looking into, and the consultation process as well.
Obviously, David, the government will be right across security of data.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I guess government does reasonably well is securely manages the data that we hold, and there have been some failures over time, but in the scheme of things, it's one of the difficulties we find in working in government is just the level of security that's imposed on us and in the way that we operate. In fact, even just by way of example, participating here today, I'm doing this on a borrowed vanilla laptop because the department's IT security won't permit the use of Zoom. So it's pretty locked down.
Yeah, so I also had a little Zoom issue. No disrespect to our friends at Zoom, just because of the security concerns that we have at AgriDigital as well. But look, I think one of the things that we need to be mindful of is that the technology roadmap needs to be for everyone. We've spoken about equity of access, earlier today, and we have to be able to develop a roadmap that can actually be adopted by the industry, not just certain players in the industry. And so, there's going to potentially have to be some compromises that we make around, how we implement the roadmap, what we put into the roadmap, and perhaps we're going to have to look at, ranges of technologies that may suit different participants with different security concerns. For example, that, government has a different level of security concern to us at AgriDigital, to a farmer, as an example. So, there's some complexity that we need to solve for, but hopefully today we've given a bit of a high-level appreciation of where we're going. We understand technology is important. We're at the forefront, of it as an industry, and we should be proud of what we've achieved so far. We just need to make sure that we're continuing to set the guideposts going forward.
I think we might leave it there. Thank you very much, Emma and David, and thank you, Dan, for your leadership as chairman of the ICAT committee. I think we're coming certainly heading in the right direction.